Back in 2023, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, resulting in a daily diet of SSRIs that shut my head off, but were overall as effective in treating my issues as using water to flavor food. A couple months later, I was desperate for a new distraction to keep the silliness in my head at bay, and was drawn to revisiting old Game Boy games I used to enjoy when I was a child. Motivated to scratch this itch, I dug around for info to set up emulation on my iPhone. In short time, I was stocked with a retro library of beloved Game Boy Advance titles at my fingertips, and even a few I had overlooked and never had the chance to experience as a kid. With ease, I sank hours of downtime into games like Dragon Ball Z Boost Fury, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, Pokemon Gold version, Wacky Races, and my all-time favorite time waster, Pokemon Pinball. The only glaring problem that got in the way of better enjoying the games was a lack of tactility with virtual controls. As thankful as I was for having the capability to run these games on my phone without native hardware, hitting the wrong input due to my fingertips ice skating away from where I'd placed them, or not being able to feel my way from one directional to another accurately, did put a damper on the novelty of the whole thing. Games that emphasize precision and constant movement, like Wacky Races for example, became more frustrating and less wacky. Though it did offer an undesired degree of immersion to the oil slicks deployed by the other racers. Glancing down at the button layout of my Game Boy Advance SP to reposition my fingers was never an issue. They were just seated in place, as is meant by design. When this became a big enough issue for me, I returned to the internet to see what sort of modding recipes I could follow to mimic the feel of solid buttons on my iPhone. At the time, options were limited and overall impractical. Hope was dimming, because I had really enjoyed my time with what was truly a happy pill above the pharmaceuticals I was taking. I was under the impression that my only alternative came down to dishing out potentially hundreds of dollars for a used Game Boy Advance unit and cartridges. That's when Jesus Christ, the real messianic pioneer of cloud gaming, anointed my algorithmic plea for a better solution, blessing me with the knowledge of the Mii Mini. It was small and expensive, and what it was capable of had my mind blown. It was something a 10-year-old me couldn't possibly fathom, and something I saw as almost inconceivable as a 31-year-old man at the time. A device that with a big enough memory storage could contain the full catalog of Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance titles, with room enough for dozens of PlayStation games, and was more pocketable than most wallets. Better yet, I could dedicate all of my retro gaming needs to it and spare draining my phone battery in exchange for an hour's worth of gameplay. Truly, this was upliftingly miraculous to me. It offered me a productive outlet that encouraged me to understand a world of technical know-how in order to use it, from understanding how different file types needed to be applied, to finding my way around installing various operating systems. The learning process, in addition to playing the games, put my head in a better space. My thinking no longer had room to wander to the thoughts that had been dragging me into the dirt before the Mii Mini came into my life. It was therapeutic, and a needed splash of light within a hole long dense with darkness. I ran through Fire Emblem for the first time, carried around a Final Fantasy 7 through 9 machine in my pocket. I had a nostalgia emporium at my disposal whenever a moment was free or if I felt my mood sink. The Mii Mini was and still is a miraculous little gaming companion, but much like Andy to Woody's worst fears, one day I didn't want to play with it anymore. From the Mii Mini, I uncovered for myself the expansive world of other emulation devices, and wasn't long after that I'd be putting my Mini on the back burner to pursue a catalog of more impressive hardware. A larger screen would be nice, or analog sticks. Oh, this can run PS2 and GameCube? Wow, that's a clean-looking device-exclusive OS. This is when I allowed a solution I was once happy with to become an entirely new problem. Months after getting great use out of my Mii Mini, I picked up my first Anbernic device, an RG353V. With even shorter time between getting the Mini and the 353V, I ventured into horizontals with the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, thinking for sure, this is it. This is the complete experience I've been looking for. I was quickly dissatisfied with the 3 Plus, knowing that there was this Android powerhouse called the Odin 2. And the Odin 2 would have been perfect if it weren't for me looking at the Steam Deck the way a dog does a steak. Even then, convinced now that with the Steam Deck I had reached the peak of what I wanted in gaming, it wouldn't end there. I would still go on to buy a Miu Mini Plus, a Powkitty RGB30, a Powkitty V90, an Anbernic RG35XX, an Anbernic RG35XXH, an Anbernic RG35XX Plus, an Anbernic RG35XX SP, an Anbernic RG406V, an Anbernic RG28XX, an Anbernic RG300X, a modded Game Boy Advance, a Nintendo DS Lite, a Nintendo DSi, a Nintendo DSi LL, two Nintendo DSi XLs, a GKD Pixel, a TrimUI Smart, a TrimUI Brick, and lastly, a Battle EXP G350. With 25 handhelds now under my belt, I was stuck in something I call a never-ending endgame mindfuck. I initially get the device because it met all of my use case needs, working reliably and without issue, until a newer, not necessarily better, device hits the scene, creating a sense of obsolescence I would begin to feel towards the device I already owned. It had become such a problem that I couldn't foresee dozens of devices later, that whichever one I was setting up to buy next as my final form for handheld gaming would suffer the same fate as the one that I'd lost interest in before getting it. Compelled by a cyclical lack of appreciation for what I already owned, I bought device after device, getting ever less use out of the next one than the previous. I'd shuffle through the libraries of games I created, chose one I wasn't even particularly interested in playing, and find myself shutting it down 10 or so minutes later. With everything that was more important than gaming in my life, it also brought upon bouts of guilt while playing, that my time could be better invested in various areas of self-improvement. And the deeper these types of thoughts burrowed, the greater the disinterest and subsequent disengagement from my gaming sessions became. So one day, I walked to where I had all of my devices neatly displayed in a part of my bedroom, seeking to play something. But the sight of this collection I had amassed for myself overwhelmed me to the point of deciding against choosing any of them. Most people know this as paralysis by analysis. Weeks became months of walking past the handhelds, devices that once took my breath away by how impressive and capable they were, now snubbed as nothing more than milestones of my own fiscal irresponsibility. Now, don't take what I'm describing from a personal experience as me saying this is the outcome to be expected for anyone buying large amounts of these devices. Some people are truly dedicated enthusiasts of this particular thing, passion-driven for the pursuit of handheld gaming, but that wasn't me. With as much eagerness as I dove into handheld gaming and with everything I learned that helped me get the most out of my devices, for me it amounted to expensive escapism. This all started because I was looking for a way to distract myself from the perils of my own mental decline. Deeper beneath, I was avoidant of confronting my subconscious to understand my own head better, and applying real fixes that weren't just burying the issues. The problems of the psyche are much like undead entities. They are not put to rest by simply throwing enough dirt on top of them. They will only resurface, often more disturbing in appearance than when you last saw them above ground. What I uncovered for myself was me trying to run to a place in time when growing up didn't yet have to be acknowledged, worried about, or planned for. I knew that wanting this was because life, as it was quite honestly encumbering me with more responsibility than I was ever used to, and I wanted little to do with it. And that's a shameful thing to admit as a father of 3 children who deserve to be put first ahead of any of my own material wants that I used to create immaterial comfort. No matter how fast I thought I could chase an ideal of the past, the reality of the present and my priorities that needed my attention existed right beside me at all times. Oddly enough, I was creating greater pain to myself by refusing to confront the constants of life's discomfort. Aside from that, this collection was not financially feasible in growing it any bigger. I had to downsize my collection. Some were truly wonderful devices, but they were the sparkling few among a mound of e-waste. Finally beginning to accept things as they were, I started to let go. I donated some of them, handed others off to friends, and the rest got sold when at the time the money provided great help. I was happy to find that lightening the load physically never caused me to regret giving up as many as I had. They were out of my hands, out of sight, and it was final, and more would not be acquired. The ones I decided to hold on to were the Miu Mini Plus, the Trim UI Brick, the G350, and my Steam Deck. Yeah, I even gave up the OG Miu Mini, the pocket miracle that brought me such joy in the first place. Each one has a specific dedicated use case: the Trim UI Brick for 32-bit gaming, the G350 for PS and Dreamcast titles, the Steam Deck for modern gaming, and I've actually made my Miu Mini Plus into a cozy little media player that contains some of my favorite series. Of course, though, each one is equipped with, yes, Pokemon Pinball. With my gaming options now far fewer, I've never enjoyed the meaning of the phrase "less is more, greater than now." I complete games more often, as I've given myself smaller libraries to choose from, and no internal wars between which among 20 different devices would be ideal to play a specific title on, which often led me to not playing anything at all. It's given me the ability to have solid intentions when I pick up and play, without being aimless for the sake of wasting time. I've learned to reward myself with it. When my day's needs have been met, sinking time into the classics has become much more enjoyable. The guilt of putting off life doesn't rear its ugly head as it once did. Ultimately, the conclusion I reached for myself was a doable compromise and not an ultimatum. But when it's come to the state of my mental health, I've needed to replace distractions with effective lifestyle changes that over time will rewire my habits. It's not easy, and throughout time, giving into that notion as an excuse to do nothing had placed me in a hole I kept digging, never once considering I would want to someday crawl out of it. That was my problem. Distracted as I was, I didn't care how far down I dug. I just wanted that next shiny thing that was just a couple more feet of dirt out of my reach, all the time. The day I finally looked up, I was frightened by how far beneath the surface I was. The effort has to be put forth to achieve this, is actual work. It's easy to want to avoid it and do something with that time that feels as though it's helping in the moment, but covertly acts as a downfall meant to punish us down the line. It's important to understand that finding yourself in a better spot isn't as simple as waking up and deciding to commit to every change you want to see in yourself all at once. That's a sure way to give up on the goal when you've set the expectations for yourself higher than you're used to managing. It's taken a day at a time. Ambitions are only as achievable as the discipline supporting them. It's okay if the change is gradual. It usually has to be. But it's the willingness to show up for the work day after day that enacts changes that are lasting. And I'm beginning to learn that perhaps for the first time in my adult life. Seeking excess in distress worsens the mess and delays success. Thanks for listening.